afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Interconnection Process Enhancements 2023 Track 3 Stakeholder Call to discuss the draft tariff language, which was posted on March 27th, and comments were due on April 7th. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. I'm joined by Bill Weaver, Assistant General Counsel, and the IPE team. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that the materials related to this meeting are available on the Interconnection Process Enhancements 2023 Initiative page. You can get to that page by going to kaiso.com and then navigating to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top. Then you can select Policy Initiatives, which will take you to our main initiative landing page. And then from that page, you'll be able to navigate to the IPE initiative page, and the latest documents will be toward the top of that page. Next slide, please. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. Please remember to keep comments professional and respectful today and refrain from repeating what has already been said so we can manage our time efficiently. Next slide, please. To ask questions during the meeting, you can open the participant and chat panels on the bottom right. And then you can raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon, or if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. You can state your name and affiliation first before speaking, and you can also send questions and comments via chat to all panelists. Next slide, please. Here's a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder initiative process. The final proposal was approved at the board in March, and we are getting the language together for the tariff filing. Next slide, please. Here's our agenda for today. Bill Weaver will be reviewing the draft tariff language changes. Afterwards, we'll wrap up with next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill, and please advance to the next slide. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bill Weaver. I'm a lawyer here at the CAISO. I'm pulling up my screen in a second. But while I do that, I'll just talk about where we are in the process and what our plans are. So this is some of the Track 3 tariff provisions. You'll notice there's no, that's really odd. You'll notice there's not much from the expansive transmission plan deliverability allocation revisions, and that's because those principally don't go into effect until the cycle after this 2025 cycle. And rather than file them now and create like a very, complicated set of grandfathered, historic, and new tariff provisions around those, we simply put them off for now and will stakeholder them and file them after this 2025 deliverability allocation cycle. There are some exceptions, which you'll see, just minor clarifications on some things and one retention rule change, but the vast majority is not in this set. You'll see minor changes today based on stakeholder comments, and we can repost effectively with those iterative changes either later this week or early next week. We will not have another round of stakeholder formal comments or certainly another call, but if you have additional concerns or revisions you want to see or things you want to discuss after this call, please feel free to reach out to me directly by email or phone. Happy to have those conversations. Our plan is to probably file this set of tariff provisions either very late next week, like Friday next week, or probably the week after that. But certainly by the end of the month, to ensure that especially the Interconnection Financial Security second posting for parked Cluster 14 projects gets taken care of so that no one feels like they need to start complying with that while we're waiting for a FERC order. So with that said, on process, I will just start going through these tariff provisions. I will note WebEx does allow you to individually zoom in and zoom out if you're not seeing this document too well. You have a little plus or minus there at the top that should allow you to take a closer look at my screen, but I apologize in advance. This can be sort of nauseating to go through, not from the substance, obviously, but just from the act of me scrolling closely through a Word document. Okay, so section 24, this first set of tariff provisions, and I mostly draft these in the way they get filed, which is not broken down by the different policies that they came from, but sort of the order they appear in the tariff. So the first thing we're going to see is section 24, which is the transmission planning process. You're going to see part of the tariff provisions for that, principally those revisions that get into what happens in the transmission planning process and what comes out of the transmission plan rather than the reservation and allocation of deliverability that's later. And really, these are kind of clarifications consistent with Order 1000 that that we have this specific carve out for, long lead time resources for public policies. Just a couple nits here that are different than what was posted. I think a couple stakeholders submitted comments noting this was just a typo, and then that we should be clear that we're specifying the amount of reserved capacity in the transmission plan rather than just the potential capacity of eligible resources. So I made that addition. But other than that, this kind of is intended to mirror the existing 24 language with, making it more transparent that these types of public policy resources are going to be spelled out in the transmission plan. There were some stakeholder suggestions here on maybe more process around the give and take of what gets decided in portfolios and the eligible resources and whatnot. And while I didn't disagree with the kind of the substance of those, I don't think they quite rose to the tariff level. I think there'll be much better BPM clarifications. I think, especially in the context of Section 24, which is, a very high-level tariff section, we want to stay at that level to ensure, to ensure flexibility as we go through this. So moving on down, we now get, actually, I usually just go iteratively, but I'm going to skip to the end and we'll finish up long lead time resources in the transmission plan, just because I know those two things are at the beginning and at the end. And then I'll pause for questions generally on this policy, as it were. But you'll see here, too, that we're just in 8.9.1 fleshing out how we're reserving the TP deliverability for these resources, for these public policies, and then allocating them based on the local regulatory authority input. So I'll pause here now. I think I can barely see that, like, when there are questions or whatnot. So Christina or others, feel free to say, just interrupt and say, Bill, there's a question. But I thought I saw something pop up.
Yeah. Hi, Bill. There's a question by Susan Schneider.
Yeah. Go ahead, Susan.
Great. Susan, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Oh, hi. This is Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Hi, Bill. Long time no see. I have just one question. When it talks about location here, we didn't put anything more specific, but I noticed, and we'll put these comments in with the draft transmission plan as well. But where it talks about location. we would really like to see POI location, and location often has meant that, at least in the intake process for cluster 15. But in the draft transmission plan, there are things like Central Coast or Imperial Irrigation District, and it does not say what substations there are that are included in that. So we could maybe want to have something more specific here, like points of interconnection or something like that. If we really do want that kind of specificity with the term location. So how do you think we need to put that in the tariff language, or can we get that some other way? Because it isn't that way in the draft transmission plan. And I know it's the first time we've really sort of gone through it this way, but what do you think about that? Can we get it? Can we get that specificity in here?
Yeah, I think I don't think it was LSA, but I think another stakeholder also suggested that we put, the specific bus bar.
Or substation or something, yeah, something like that.
I guess my resistance to doing that is, is ensuring flexibility down the line, for the local regulatory authorities to work with, right? Because I don't know, for me as a lawyer, I don't know what these Category 1 transmission solutions are always going to look like, or, are we creating, a round hole for future square pegs that don't quite fit necessarily with it, or it's unrealistic to say that's, this bus bar or a POI or whatnot. But let me take it back to the transmission planners and see what, if they think it's worth being more specific or trying to stay flexible here. Like, ultimately, I mean, we see this playing out very similar to the transmission plan today, I suppose, where, you're seeing a line and exactly kind of where it is and how it works. But we can take that back, Susan.
Yeah, I mean, because I think we really do need that information. For example, whatever comes out of this transmission plan will go into the next TPD allocation cycle, and people really do need to know where, exactly what the specific location, and really more specific than just the word location, but where things are being reserved. And I have a follow-on question for that, but maybe, and again, I'm not sure about the venue for that. But anyway, if you could take that back, that would be helpful. When the CAISO does a reservation, say at Harry Allen, there's a whole bunch of downstream substations between Harry Allen or Palo Verde, or some places where they actually did specify a location in the draft transmission plan, all the way down to the load. And so there presumably are impacts. If you're reserving something at Harry Allen, you're reserving it kind of all the way in. And there are impacts at other substations as well. So the reservations are affecting those, and they may not be a specific reservation at whatever's between Harry Allen and, the Bay Area or LA, but there are impacts there. And so I'm wondering, is there a way to capture that?
I mean, I'm sure there is, right? And it's a question of, like, are we talking about in the transmission plan, how we capture that? Or in the tariff, where it's like, I feel like, now you're arguing my point. It's very hard to be like, to put a term in the tariff that then is going to be 100% accurate on where this is all occurring.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to be arguing your point, but anyway.
I mean, we're certainly not trying to hide the ball here. Like, I think we want to be in everyone's interest that we're incredibly clear on, like, where these reservations are, how much they are, and who's affected. And I don't think we have any intent of doing otherwise. I just want to make sure that in the tariff, as like we create these transmission solutions in the first place, I guess, that we don't make it too hard for local regulatory authorities to, I guess I'm way more worried about false negatives than I am about false positives, where it's like, we actually have a hard time affecting the policy because we feel like we're trapped at, this POI or this bus bar that we named, because we felt like we had to name one. So let us think about this more carefully and
Okay.
bring it back. But I think in the transmission plan, you're going to get the results you want.
Well, I hope so. And so we're going to also make these comments there because people do need to know, for example, if there's no deliverability at some place between Harry Allen and LA because you'd reserved at Harry Allen, people need to know that that's the case, you know?
Right.
So,
Right.
okay. All right. We'll make those comments in the TPP, but if you could give that some thought here as well, I would really appreciate that.
No, those are good notes. Thank you, Susan.
I'm not
Okay.
seeing any further hands raised at this time. So back to you, Bill.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump back up. Nope. Oh, I already went back up for Susan. Okay. So I think we're moving on now from long lead time resources and public policy deliverability reservations. This is one of the, I think, 2 or 3 little transmission plan deliverability rules that got changed that we're doing now rather than later. And this first one is simply just switching from a $60,000 deposit to a $5,000 flat fee for energy-only capacity that is seeking a deliverability allocation. Let's see. Also here, this is one of the other ones for Group D. There's just a tweak here that, yeah, it could be that this is a partial capacity deliverability resource, and we're really only talking about the energy-only portion. And again, this is a very unique scenario where this is a Group D customer that has already lost its deliverability for whatever reason, and now it has a portion that is energy only, or it's entirely energy only, but it wants to extend its commercial operation date or otherwise move, and it's still, even that energy only portion is under these Group D restrictions unless it has a PPA. This is just clarifying that you couldn't have an RA or deliverable PPA for that energy only purpose. Okay. You still, can submit obviously RA deliverability PPAs for anything where you're trying to get deliverability or retain deliverability. This is entirely new, bringing this section in for 8.9.3. This was an LSA comment saying that this was worth bringing in now rather than later, and we agree, although I did it slightly different than LSA suggested, simply because, first I'll say what we're doing. What we're doing here is saying that a new Group D interconnection customer, no longer will show shortlisting in the next year. If they get a Group D allocation in 2025, they will then have to show a PPA in the next TP deliverability allocation retention process, which will be in 2027. I kept the existing language simply because there are 2024 Group D projects who could show shortlisting this year and thus didn't want to strike it entirely, and then they would show PPAs the following process. So there's a little 2 groups there, but effectively captured that the retention requirements will change for Group D projects starting with this process. Okay, that was complicated to explain, but pretty straightforward clarification. Not much to see there. Again, same thing on deliverability transfers for energy-only projects, essentially the ASINOR who is losing their deliverability, for them to stay in queue and not be removed under the new rules from track 2 of IPE. They have to provide a PPA, and they can't provide a deliverable or RA PPA because they're not. They just gave up their deliverability. Okay.
So it does look like we have 2 hands raised, if we want to take them.
Okay. Sure. Yep. Thanks.
All right, so we do got a hand raised from Susan Allen, but we'll go with Susan again first. Susan, your line's unmuted.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider from Phoenix Consulting, representing LSA. I was asked to clarify that. Okay, so if you could, yeah, I wanted to focus on this particular, the one you just had up there.
Oh, sorry.
If you could just
Oh,
go,
this one.
yeah, there you go. Okay, it's very confusing because if an energy only project is, for example, requesting a TPD allocation, they most certainly can have an agreement, a PPA, submit a PPA that requires deliverability. Or if they're doing it for retention, they most certainly can do it. So it's I know we submitted some comments here a little bit more than just this. It would be very helpful to have a little more clarification, for people who read this. It just is confusing because in some places it's okay to submit for these people to submit a PPA that requires deliverability, and in some cases it's not. So if you could clarify, instead of just this blanket statement here saying what you're really doing is require, and you can read our comments, but in certain circumstances you can't submit one that requires deliverability, and in certain circumstances you can. I do think this is just confusing when you have it stated this way, but then other ways, and it applies differently in other places. I just wish you would again, check our comments out, but this is really for energy only customers who requested a TPD allocation under Group D, but then they didn't get one, or you're talking about not talking about, or post transfer or something. It's just this statement here, I think, is just going to cause a lot of confusion as it is written.
Okay, well, I'll re-review your comments there. Ultimately, I think, you just have this sentence is just modifying the previous sentence, but yeah, we could add something simpler, like, I was trying to make it, I thought it would be more confusing if I'm then detailing all the exceptions of, unless you're seeking or retaining TPD, then this, but.
Well, we tried to do that.
I get your point. Let me re-review and go back there.
Appreciate it, because it is sort of separate from the prior sentence, actually, because that's a project that is, that basically says if they've demonstrated that your power purchase is not even subject to this section. So it's just, anyway, if you would take another look, I would really appreciate that. If you scroll down to 8.9.3, the correction that you put in there instead of our language is actually perfectly fine. That's fine the way you have it. And then if you could go down to the next one, the deliverability transfers. Okay, and again, you're talking about here only for purposes of deliverability transfer. You're saying this, but in other cases it's okay. So it's a little more clear here because it's under at least the heading of deliverability transfers, whereas the earlier part was only under allocation Group D. It wasn't specific to any use of that PPA at all.
Well, yeah, but it does say an energy only power purchase agreement, which an interconnection customer is only going to submit outside of seeking or trying to retain deliverability.
What is an energy only power purchase agreement that requires deliverability? That's not an energy only power purchase agreement. It's a PPA, or it's a PPA that requires deliverability. So that even of itself is confusing.
Yep, fair. No, that's fair. I'm not going to argue there, but okay.
So yeah, if you could just say what you actually mean, if it's energy only one that doesn't require deliverability, then it's just energy only, and then it's okay. But that's for only some purposes. Anyway, so I think what you're saying is you won't accept a PPA from an energy only capacity that that it requires deliverability, but that's a little different sentence. So it's what is an energy only PPA that requires deliverability? Not an energy only PPA, right? So anyway, if you could just think this through a little bit more and make it a little clearer, I just think it would be a good idea.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
Thanks so much.
Next in the queue, we have Alan C. And Alan, before speaking, if you could let us know your full name and affiliation.
All right, Alan, you're unmuted.
Yeah, hi, Alan Combs with New Energy Works Consulting. Susan covered my comments, so I'll just reiterate that the sentence you have there, I just don't know how how it can be implemented without a separate document. So if there's any way you can make the language clearer. I mean, again, a purchase power agreement isn't an energy only agreement if it requires deliverability. I mean, that's just kind of turns things on their head, but Susan covered it already, so I'll stop.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, moving on. Let's see, we are on, okay, did this one, let's see, did this one. Okay, on to, this is the postponement of the interconnection financial security, the second postings for essentially parked cluster 14 projects. I did this where it was the later of May 29th, 2026, or 60 days after the results of the process. We intend that those A and B will be the same, but sometimes the schedules change slightly, and so I wanted to make sure everyone got the latter. So anyways, that's fairly easy to understand. No one submitted comments on this, I don't think. So I think we're moving on to the intra-cluster reliability network upgrade prioritization. See, there were some comments here, so I'm just going to go over kind of the changes. I took off independently because, I mean, the sentence is limited to RNUs anyways, and I think there were a couple of comments concerned that I guess RNUs, multiple RNUs jointly were somehow excluded, but I mean, it is plural here, and yeah, that would certainly be the case. Yeah, I mean, you only need one multiple of 4 years or more. It's you know, your in-service data is delayed by RNUs either way. So in any case, you know, we agree with that sentiment, and kind of change the tariff this way to make that clear. But I agree with the substance of those comments. I think this market notice.
We do have a
okay,
couple hands raised, whenever you want to take a moment.
Okay, thanks. And then just to finish the other change on this visible page, yeah, I think this market notice language was copied from from the TP deliverability market notice process, but I agreed with comments that it's like, I don't know what this means to interested parties. I mean, really, it is just a market notice that goes out blankly. We will otherwise notify specific interconnection customers here in these later provisions, but otherwise just clarifying that a market notice goes out to everyone. All right, go ahead.
First, we have Susan.
Susan, you're on mute.
Hi, Bill. Just a quick explanation. The examples that that LSA members put out were, for example, they may have 2 long lead time upgrades and that are at least 4 years long and delaying their CODs by at least 2 years. And so if it turns out only one of them is eligible here, well then speeding them up won't really, you know, getting headroom allocation won't really help them because they still have the other one. But in the case where let's say both upgrades, and I know it's a sort of a constructed example, but if both upgrades are eligible, then they should be allowed to even though neither one independently is delaying them by that long, because there's the other one, that they both, if there's 2 and they're both included in its process, then as eligible upgrades, they should be allowed to participate. And that was the nature of the comment. So I appreciate your taking out the independently. We had made that comment in comments on the TPD or on track 3, but there wasn't any matrix or anything responding, so we didn't know if that was intended, and we were hoping that it was, that they could participate. So it seems like by removing the word independently, that would allow them to do it. And if that's the CAISO's intent, we really appreciate that change.
Yeah, I think when I wrote independently the first time, it was to try to exclude delivery network upgrades, not silo, not make it a individual basis, yeah.
And of course, the delivery network upgrades are not delaying CODs.
Right, right. I mean, I think the policy was clear though, that it's like, I guess if someone's DNUs are way out there such that, you know, the interconnection customer isn't going to, interconnect anyways.
Then you lose points in the competitive process for the headroom. Okay,
Right.
so that's where that's taken into account. But in terms of just being eligible to participate, if they have more than one and the upgrades that are all delaying them are in here, they're really able to participate. So that's, again, we appreciate that clarification and that's it. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Next in the queue, we have Nritya.
All right, your line's unmuted.
Hi, this is Nritya Guru from PGND. I had a question about the line that says interconnection studies and GIAs will be updated to reflect when the IC can interconnect earlier. May I ask which interconnection studies would need to be updated?
It's a good question. I mean, generally, I'm guessing this, I mean, it's like whichever interconnection studies you have is kind of an answer. I'm not trying to be cute, but like, and usually that means that we're going back and revising or adding an addendum to the phase 2, because it's hard to imagine anyone with just a phase 1 study that this would apply to. But I mean, you know, essentially all of them, but really probably the phase 2 study to the extent necessary. I mean, really capturing in the GIA is going to be the most important aspect for certainly the interconnection customer. But yeah.
Is it required to do this, or is this just if it's identified that something's required? Because all this process is doing is letting the project come before the upgrade is built, right? So I can see the changes in the COD and the ISD, but nothing really I mean, that gets captured in the GIA anyway. So I don't see anything else that would change, because cost responsibilities don't get changed due to this process.
I mean, that's essentially right. The phase 2 study, though, does, you know, specify the earliest achievable in-service dates, and like, you know, I think we're going to add, we might need to revise those, and we're also going to like provide more specificity around, you know, what is happening with the RNUs. So I guess I'm not too, I think it's probably better for interconnection customers and PTOs and the KISO that we do, like, you know, have some tariff responsibility to update the interconnection studies as, you know, as we go along.
So does this mean each time a project is selected and their COD dates change, we would have to go back and issue an addendum as well as the report which says that they can come online before the upgrade is built? Because there is the report that PTOs and ISO would be releasing which projects get selected through this process. And then we would be updating the GIAs to reflect that. I guess I just want to understand if an addendum is, whether this language says that an addendum would be absolutely necessary, or just that if it is necessary, that it can be issued.
Yeah, well, let me take this back to, I mean, I think, you know, I'm pretty sure like we do this today, that we go back and issue these reports if like the RNUs change, I think. But I can take this back to, you know, the planning department and see, but I think we're going to want to keep interconnection studies there, but let me take it back and make sure, you know, the planners and the PTO engineers are okay with that process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on, RNU prioritization. This is the is kind of the scoring section based on the policy. It looks very similar. It's intended to look very similar to the transmission plan deliverability allocation scoring section, except, you know, some of the points are different. They will ultimately be specified how many points in the business practice manual, similar to the transmission plan deliverability allocation process. I think there was one comment on 4A that these be real energy only customers, and that they have an energy only power purchase agreement. I don't think, I think that's outside of the scope of, you know, me doing it in the tariff, because, you know, that was never put into the policy as a requirement for these points. You know, it was just this 4A, so didn't quite do that. On ties, there was a comment on how we calculate the lowest contribution, and we agreed to clarify that it would be lowest contribution per megawatt of short circuit duty contribution. Please, no one ask me what these things mean, because I'm definitely over my skis on that. But we made that clarification as requested.
We do have a hand raised whenever you have a moment.
Yep, go ahead.
First up, we have Maya.
Maya, you're unmuted.
Hi, Bill. This is Maya Habib with Intersect Power. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just going back to 4A, the deliverability network upgrade status scoring. It was us, Intersect Power, that submitted the comment. I just want to clarify, like, you know, we understand that the request we're proposing is a little bit outside of just, you know, tariff drafting. I think the concern here is that, you know, in QC15 onwards, this won't be a problem, because all energy-only projects will be real energy-only projects that would be requesting TPD, or that would not be able to request TPD. But if in all of the queues pre-cluster 15, some of these projects may just be waiting to request TPD. And the concern here is that some of the headroom would be given to those projects that, you know, may or may not actually be ready enough. So just wanted to make that comment, given that, you know, we understand the CAISO's intent and we agree. We just want to make sure that it's not being used in different ways.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. Yeah, I understood the intent of the proposal, and I'm sure there are people within the CAISO who greatly sympathize with that idea. But I felt like, you know, it was outside of my scope to add it here in the tariff process. But it's definitely something we can consider as we get going. And like you said, hopefully it's, you know, it's not an issue after cluster 14 in any case. Hopefully this is not an issue for any cluster.
Thanks.
Okay. Oh, sorry, was there another question here?
Yeah, we have one more hand raised by Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, you're unmuted.
Hey, Bill, can you go back down to that per megawatt thing that you just sort of skipped over there? Okay. When we had discussed this during I forgot even which stakeholder process it was, but I think it was this last one. If your contribution per megawatt is more like your DFACs, and I thought the intent here, just my recollection from this discussion, was to give smaller projects a little bit of, I wouldn't say an advantage, but they get, because you could accommodate the most projects if there were smaller megawatts. So I do not believe per megawatt is actually part of this proposal, or that it was intended to be.
Okay, well, let me take it back. I'm not sure how, you know, I'm way over my skis here on like how it works for short circuit duty contribution.
Yeah, I think the idea was that it not per megawatt, but it's actually the lowest contribution, meaning, you know, smaller projects have smaller megawatts. And so the idea would be to accommodate as many of them as possible here. because you only have so much short circuit capacity capability. I'm not an engineer, so I'm probably using the wrong terms, but available. And so if you do the per megawatt, well, then you might only fit, you know, one large project in there. I mean, my you know, LSA is mostly large clients, large projects, but I do think this was not quite the intent here, and certainly didn't seem to be that from the discussion.
Okay, that could be correct, and I'll say, like, the comment this was responding to was not necessarily saying it should be X, more that lowest contribution was ambiguous, and they want us to say, well, what it was specifically.
Yeah, but
let
for
me get back to
megawatt, you might as well just say defects then. I think that's normally how sort of the terminology is used for that. Or maybe not defects with that short circuit duty, I don't know. But anyway, that's, I guess I'm just sort of raising a question, not really answering it.
Okay. I'll take that back.
Thanks.
Let's see. We're now moving into Appendix KK, although, oh, actually, I think we're almost done. On this 8.9.1, I think I need to double check, but I think I'm also you'll see mirrored revisions to these that I put in Appendix KK, in Appendix DD, just to be clear there that I guess the reservation is happening, but don't quote me on that. I'm gonna verify. In any case, let's see. We already did this section when we did this. Well, I think I noted someone commented didn't know what unique meant. I changed it to corresponding. I'm trying to just capture that it's, you know, the transmission solutions that go to that public policy, those resources, not some extra special type, but bespoke or corresponding. We'll figure out a word there. There was also a note here from a different stakeholder that we should clarify available existing transmission can also be part of this also be part of this B. That is true, added that. Okay, and then I think we see a repeat of the switch to $5,000 flat fee for energy-only capacity. Although that's much harder to do for a cluster 15 project. Okay, well, that is it. As I said, I will post an updated version later this week or early next week, and then file end of next week or the following, but definitely by the end of the month. If you have any questions or want to follow up on any specific issue or see anything you still, don't feel like you can live with after we repost, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you can't get a hold of me, contact Danielle or Stakeholder Affairs. And thank you everyone for submitting comments and for participating in this call. Christina, if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up.
We do have one more hand raised by Susan.
Susan, you're unmuted.
Hey, Bill, just a housekeeping. You guys have been pretty good about this, but I'm assuming you'll put out a market notice when you post the draft revised tariff language.
So I don't know. I don't do that. Christina, what do you think? Do we do that?
Yeah, there you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be great. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay. I just send it to Christina. I don't know where it goes from there. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and happy Wednesday.
Ryan, if you could take us back, thank you. And then if you could go forward one more. Bill, if you wanted to take this slide before we wrap up.
Nope, I think I just covered that pretty well, so I think we're all good.
Okay, perfect. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ryan. We just have a couple of announcements now before we wrap up. Here's an overview with links to other meetings this week. Next slide, please. As well as comment deadlines, trainings, market sim, and BPM process. Next slide, please. For insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for an Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. And with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's call. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and conveniences purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage. Thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for using Teller Events. You may now disconnect.